Hello and welcome to you all. It is another Friday, which means it's time to swim through the swirling whirlpool of lies and misinformation and media untruths and bias and surrendered objectivity, all of these things, and curated in a neat little fun package for you. I think it's fun anyway, that we call Fake News Friday. I am Andrew Lawton, joined as always by Harrison Faulkner, host of the fantastic show Ratioed on True North. Harrison, big week. Obviously, we had some changes in UK politics. We had the Public Order Emergency Commission in Canada, but even so, we can always rely on the constant of Canadian mainstream media freakouts.
Well, exactly. We've always got that going. Of course, we've got the amazing testimony we're hearing now from the Emergencies Act Commission. It's only been week one, Andrew. We haven't even gotten to the good part yet, but it seems as though it's really starting to heat up. And of course, we're going to lead with this story. But it's the fact checkers, the mainstream media fact checkers have swooped in to try and clean up their narrative. And somehow, somewhere along in this whole process, True North gets sort of lumped into this fact check. So we're going to get into that. And it's a pretty interesting story, but I think it speaks to just this insistence from legacy media, from mainstream media to fact check things that, to use a fact check to really just push their narrative, push their opinion. So it's an interesting story, and I'm looking forward to kind of dissecting it a little bit.
Yeah, let's jump right into that now. So last week, True North shared this exchange from the European Parliament between Dutch MEP Robert Roos and Janine Small of Pfizer.
So a question then for you, Ms. Small, where I would like a clear answer, please.
So there are no misunderstandings. Was the Pfizer COVID vaccine tested on stopping the transmission of the virus before it entered the market? If not, please say it clearly. If yes, are you willing to share the data with this committee? And I really want a straight answer, yes or no, and I'm looking forward to it. Thank you very much.
Regarding the question around, did we know about stopping immunisation before it's entered the market? No. We had to really move at the speed of science to really understand what is taking place in the market. And from that point of view, we had to do everything at risk. I think our Dr. Bourla, even though he's not here, would turn around and say to you himself, if not us, then who? Dr. Bourla actually felt the importance of what was going on in the world. And therefore, as a result of that, we actually spent $2 billion at risk of self-funded money from Pfizer to be able to manufacture, first of all, research, develop and manufacture at risk to be able to make sure that we were in a position to be able to help with the pandemic. And I think that's why I feel very good when a recent paper from the Imperial College stated that in the first year of the rollout of vaccines, we saved 4 million people. So from that point of view, I feel that actually we were there when the world needed us to be able to make sure that we were able to help people around the world with vaccination as well as now oral treatment. I would hate to imagine what situation we would be in the world right now if companies like us did not take those risks, did not do clinical research and developments at scale in order to make sure that we could have a vaccine that we could roll out to the world. So I understand your frustrations, I really do. But I also hope at some point somewhere you also do appreciate what pharmaceutical companies have done in order to be able to roll out and deliver vaccines at such speed and scale.
That was a pretty explosive clip. It was Janine Small talking about how Pfizer moved at the speed of science, which I believe is faster than the speed of sound, not quite as fast as the speed of light, a little bit slower than Superman when he's had a heavy meal even. But the executive was saying that Pfizer did not test against transmission. So there was no scientific basis for the idea that the vaccine that Pfizer was putting out for COVID would protect you against transmission, which means that the basis for vaccine passports, which was that we need to make spaces more safe because we need to only ensure that the vaccinated are able to access them, it meant that that was a big, huge lie from politicians. So we share this clip. Now, this is about as official as it gets. This is an elected official interviewing in an official capacity, an official from a company that has done billions of dollars worth of work on the vaccine file around the world. All of this is to say there is very little about this that is misinformation because we're sharing someone's own words. But that didn't stop Reuters from pouncing by putting a fact check here, and not just that, but saying that True North specifically sharing this clip, we weren't the only outlet that did, was a bit misinformed perhaps.
And so, Andrew, it's important to just kind of go through this process. First off, True North often will not share content, videos that are not specifically Canadian news related. But when this video did come up originally, it was first posted by Rob Roos, that MEP, as you said. And that video has over 13 million views on Twitter. And immediately we realized that this kind of blows the lid off of the justification for the mandates placed on Canadians. The idea that the vaccine would stop transmission, that idea that we are told constantly this is to stop the spread of the virus. Well, this testimony from the Pfizer executive in Europe kind of makes the case as though actually no one really knew that to be the case. Politicians didn't know that. So we posted it, and I even went through, I posted it myself, and I went to great lengths to make sure that I wasn't just copying Rob Roos's video. We went to the original source, the European Parliament sort of media center, to get this clip, making sure that what we were getting was 100% accurate. And we don't just throw things up on social media. We do make sure this is accurate stuff. And of course, along comes Reuters, and the Reuters fact check is important to go through. You would think that a company like Reuters, with a fact check team like they have, they would put together if they were going to attack this video, they would try and show the biggest tweets of the video, the tweets that got the most traction. But it was strange, Andrew. They didn't do that. They shared the original Rob Roos video, then they shared our video from True North. They embedded the video into the article, and then they shared a tweet from someone with 18 likes copying our video, which I just thought to me was very strange. Like they're trying to make the case as though True North was somehow involved in this. We basically did our own fact check of the fact checkers, which I think is quite required these days, especially what we're getting from Reuters. We did this, and we
hang on, I've got to call out your misinformation there, Harrison. It's important to deal with this in real time. He has 21 likes on that tweet.
21
as of
likes.
the time we're recording this.
Exactly.
So you're Reuters. I'm sending Reuters to your front door for that. You were 3 likes off. Who knows what else you're getting wrong?
Yeah, exactly. Now we have to go through everything else. But so in our fact check of the Reuters fact check, what we found was that actually immediately upon Reuters trying to basically label True North's video as misleading, Andrew, Twitter users from all across the world descended on that Reuters tweet and basically started sharing videos of Albert Bourla, the CEO of Pfizer, saying exactly that, saying that this was going to stop the transmission of the virus, this was going to stop the spread of the virus. And in one tweet, he said the booster vaccine had a 100% effectiveness in South Africa at stopping the spread. And then, of course, Pfizer themselves, in their official Twitter account, they also were telling people that the virus was stopping transmission of the virus. The vaccine was stopping transmission of the virus. Contradictory to what the Pfizer executive said in European Parliament. So this all just, I think, goes to show you that for so long, for the past 2-3 years, Andrew, we've been getting fact checks from Reuters, from AP, they also got in on this. We've been getting fact checks from them which only really uphold a narrative. They don't actually tell us or tell people what is wrong about a video. Nowhere do they say True North was wrong. All they do is say this is misleading. So to me, it's actually very sinister that we have fact checkers coming in that are pushing a narrative and aren't actually just telling us what's true and what's false. I don't want to hear narratives. I want to hear the facts from a fact checker. Turns out maybe Andrew, we should start doing our own fact check. I brought this up. Maybe we should hire our own fact checker at True North to do exactly this.
Yeah, but then you end up in like an endless cycle of fact-checking. I want to show a tweet here. Alexandra Marshall, who's a great writer with The Spectator in Australia, she wrote a column in which she took aim at fact-checking, and she said, "Are fact-checkers liars?" And it was an opinion piece in which she talked about the errors and misinformation that we see in the fact-checking process. And just like clockwork on Facebook, she gets the fact-checking sticker on there, missing context, independent fact checkers say this information could mislead people right above the headline of the article, which is "Are fact checkers liars?" So you can't fact check the fact checkers because then they fact check your fact check of the fact checking, and eventually we're just all fact checked endlessly until we die. It's like the police in Canada doing the daily background check of gun owners. Now we're just going to get like the daily fact check, and people on the right are going to be accused of misinformation. People on the left are going to get a pass. But it's been particularly insidious on the COVID file because, as we've seen, and I've joked about this in some ways, yesterday's misinformation is today's government press release. So the thing that's misinformation now, we're kind of flipping it a bit because now they're saying, no one ever claimed it prevented transmission. It's like this big, huge gaslighting of the population here when that was the entire basis of the government's mandates of vaccines.
Exactly. I mean, how many times, Andrew, did we hear Justin Trudeau during the federal campaign, for example, using this issue to wedge Canadians, to divide the unvaccinated, and to specifically say multiple times, for example, when he famously said, if you don't want to get vaccinated, that's your choice, but don't think you can get on a plane or a train beside vaccinated people and put them at risk. Now, you would assume that because of that, that would mean that the vaccine stops the spread of the virus. If you're vaccinated, you won't put others at risk because you're going to stop the spread of the virus. That just exactly points to this idea that, we can be led a narrative, Andrew, for a whole year, and then immediately when it starts to crumble, fact checkers can come in and totally shift the window and basically say, no, it was actually never required. The manufacturers were never required to test the vaccine for stopping transmission before politicians told us it would, and before politicians enacted these horribly divisive policies. And we write in the fact checkers, it's important to just make it clear that I think, of course, we are biased ourselves to our own company, but our fact check kind of labels it clearly what's been going on here. So we write this: Reuters' assertion that Pfizer never claimed that their original submissions to regulators included tests for transmission appears to be accurate, but their own fact check is misleading because it entirely ignores the fact that political and public discussions about the vaccines were often driven by the incorrect assumption that the vaccines would halt transmission. That's exactly what we're talking about here. That's really where the fact checkers should be coming in on this. But it seems as though there's some sort of collected interest. They want to try and defend the manufacturers against what is explosive testimony, to use that word again. This took the internet by storm because people were rightly upset. And I think, it ends up falling on True North. It ends up falling on other media companies, Andrew, to try and get these videos out there. Because it appears as though Reuters, they're supposed to be a wire service. They're not gonna write news about this.
Yeah, and that's why we share the raw footage as often, because I want, for my own benefit, but also for everyone else to see the source of it, to see where we're getting the information. So you don't need to filter your version of reality through someone else's filter. So in any case, I gotta really segue naturally into, speaking of filters, the Public Order Emergency Commission. Now, you've been covering this on Ratioed. I've been covering it on the Andrew Lawton Show. Rupa Subramanya has been covering it on her show, our news coverage. So for the next 6 weeks now, there's going to be a lot of Public Order Emergency Commission content. But I think there's a particular level of interest that I have about the way the media is approaching this. And sometimes two people can look at the same story and come up with wildly different conclusions. And I'll give you one example here before we get into it. CBC has a headline: OPP intelligence warned of potential Ottawa mass protests 2 weeks before convoy. So what they're saying is that the Intelligence Bureau flagged a mass anti-government protest. So that was fair enough. We know there was a protest. I don't know if it was accurate to call it anti-government. I think it was anti-the Liberal government. But then you look further, and the story that they've buried in there is that OPP intelligence found for the entirety of the convoy no evidence of violence, no evidence of extremism, no evidence of insurrection, no evidence of any of these things. Shouldn't that be the story rather than the OPP learned about the protest 2 weeks before it happened? I guess not.
No, Andrew, and we've seen this so often. And again, this speaks exactly to why I think True North and other media outlets who are covering this why people go to our coverage, because they know exactly what they're going to get from the CBC, from the Toronto Star. You took that headline from the CBC regarding the OPP intelligence officer's testimony. Well, just take a look at this. This is the way that the Toronto Star wrote about revelations that CSIS told the government from the very beginning there was no intelligence that the convoy was being foreign funded, right? There was no idea that there was no intelligence that said there's foreign interference in the donations of the convoy. The Toronto Star took that information, and of course, in their usual way, they sculpted and architected this ridiculous headline that basically goes on to just state that it doesn't matter. These guys were horrible already. It doesn't matter. There's no information that can convince us otherwise. The Toronto Star headline was this: Freedom Convoy didn't need help from foreigners to overwhelm Ottawa police. Inquiry told October 18th. Andrew, it's actually a skill. I have to take my hat off to some of these legacy media reporters for for seeing information that is so damaging to their narrative. So it's so destructive to this narrative they've tried to craft for the whole year, and then find a way to still spin it to make themselves, put themselves in the right position, to find a way to still spin it to make these truckers, these protesters, who now we know there was no intelligence of violence from the very beginning. So these peaceful Canadian truckers, the media are so skilled at finding ways to maintain that narrative that they'll never give it up, Andrew. I don't think there's really any piece of evidence that will come out from these commission hearings where we'll get Global News, we'll get Globe and Mail or the Toronto Star to write this basically accurately. They're always going to stick to their narrative. And the Globe and Mail, to their credit, they just took that information and wrote the headline, I think, accurately. CSIS found no foreign actors funding the convoy protests, according to inquiry evidence. Right, that's how you should write the story. But of course, the Toronto Star, we know what we're going to get from them. They're going to spin it religiously. They are absolutely stuck to this narrative, no matter what comes from the commission hearings.
I should say, there's nothing inaccurate about what the Toronto Star wrote in its headline. Freedom Convoy didn't need help from foreigners to overwhelm Ottawa police. Well, no, that's technically true. I mean, the headline could also be, Freedom Convoy didn't murder 17 people in the street. So it's the place it's coming from that I find is noteworthy, because they're the ones that implied there was foreign influence. They're the ones that implied there was foreign funding. So when they're saying they didn't need the help, it's like there were a bunch of Russians on Sussex Street that were offering their assistance, and then the Freedom Convoy said, yeah, we're all good. But no, it's it just didn't exist, and it just wasn't there. So it is fascinating, and it's becoming a bit of a Rorschach exercise where everyone's looking at these commissions and somehow just drawing their own sort of narrative affirming conclusions from it. And the Toronto Star is one example here. And I think, just interestingly enough, when Jim Watson talks about this, everything he says is just bordering on unhinged, if not going straight beyond into that. And one particular one here, he talks about losing control. He talks about, similar to Zexi Lee from last week, the purge-like mentality. He talks about just how dire things were.
And so you recall you had a discussion with the Prime Minister on this day?
Yeah, I'm just looking for my notes. It's February 8th.
You can zoom into that. Yeah, February 8th. Yeah, thank you.
Just trying.
And we'll go down to the kind of the meat of it. Yes, a little bit down more. There we go.
Sorry, I'm not seeing it on the 8th on my chronology, but if you have it, I'll believe you.
Yes, it should be on the screen there. February 8th, a call, readout of the call with the Prime Minister. And if we go to the second page, you say, the Prime Minister asks how you're doing. You say, a challenge for everyone, still a pretty unstable situation, nasty people out there that just don't represent Canada. Reminds me of the Republican Party down south. Can't reason with them, so vulgar and hateful, attacking people, ripping masks off, honking their horns. It's not over yet, and I appreciate...
You might slow down a bit for the interpreters. I'm just worried.
Oh, okay, sorry. I'm just aware of the time, but yes, you're right. Let's slow down for the interpreters. It's not over yet, and I appreciate that I had a really good conversation with Marco and Bill. We have a table with the PT this afternoon at 4:30.
Lawlessness. Well, that's terrible. How does he define lawlessness? As you just heard, people were having parties.
Yeah, Andrew, like the dance parties. I think at some point also he said the dance parties and raves stole the neighborhoods away from Ottawa residents. Now, again, I was on the ground there. You were too. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I only think that there were dance parties and raves, so-called dance parties and raves, on Wellington Street. And from what I know of Ottawa, I don't live in Ottawa, but from what I know,
don't so-called it. There was dancing morning to night. The dancing was a key part of this.
I was inside some of those.
You're doing the mainstream media thing. The so-called Freedom Convoy, the so-called dance party. By gosh, it was a real dance party.
You're exactly right. It was a real dance party. I'm only trying to return the favor on the media. They, as you said, they always use the word so-called Freedom Convoy. Well, we'll just return that right back. But of course, they were only on Wellington Street, I'm pretty sure, Andrew. And last I checked, again, I'm not from Ottawa, but last I checked, there are no residents who live on Wellington. It's a non-residential street. That's beside the point, but I want to just kind of go back to this CBC article that was published on Thursday, talking about the OPP intelligence warning of potential Ottawa mass protests 2 weeks before convoy. That's what they wrote. And True North's article on this said OPP officer says no intel of convoy violence. And I think if you were watching this, anyone would really realize that the OPP intelligence officer, Pat Morris, his testimony was the news of the day. That was for sure what overshadowed the previous city councilor's testimony. It's just, it is alarming to me, Andrew, that the legacy media, like I said before, they are committed to one side of this. And maybe you could say that we're committed to the other side of it, but in my opinion, we're filling a very important need here. Because, like you said, you have two outlets looking at the same story, hearing the same testimony, and coming to vastly different conclusions. Vastly different conclusions. I think at the end of the day, it's good for the Canadian media landscape that we do have alternative points of view on this. But it does speak to me that I don't think we're going to see, in my opinion, fair, impartial, balanced coverage from the legacy media throughout this hearing. We have 5 more weeks of this, Andrew. We've got a long way to go. Justin Trudeau still to testify, the senior members of the cabinet still to testify, and convoy leadership as well. So it's going to be more important as we go further in this process. And I'm just hoping that we're going to try and get some better coverage here from the legacy media, because right now it's been horrendous. No checks on some of these outlandish statements. No real coverage on the fact that the city councillors were calling trucks weapons, and that the mayor viewed the truckers before they even right when they first arrived in Ottawa as un-Canadian and as like Republicans from down south. I mean, this guy had it out for the truckers from the very start, clearly. And I think that is worth coverage, but we're not going to get it.
No, I don't think so, but any coverage we do get, we'll have to wait until next weekend, because the members of the Parliamentary Press Gallery have a bit of a party coming up on Saturday. They're doing the annual Parliamentary Press Gallery dinner, which is basically Canada's imitation of the Gridiron Club thing, where you have journalists and politicians that are supposed to kick back and relax and have fun and make fun of each other and themselves. This was where that great photo of Andrew Scheer chugging a 1-liter carton of milk came from, making fun of his relentless support for supply management. So it's a decent enough event, but at a certain point, you have to decide if you want to just rub shoulders with the people that despise you. And Pierre Poilievre, for whatever reason, decided he would break with tradition and not attend the Parliamentary Press Gallery dinner this weekend. So what's happening here is that there's no reason provided. Poilievre's office just said, I'm not going to go to, or he's not going to go to it. Stephen Harper went when he was an opposition leader, but didn't go when he was prime minister. So that was pretty much a 10-year period. Pierre Poilievre has had one media availability since he became the Conservative leader, and that was when David Akin just started like verbally pummeling him for reasons that I can't even remember. He's not done, to my knowledge, any sit-down interviews. He didn't do a lot of legacy media interviews during the leadership race. So he's kind of just sticking to what's been working for him. And we can all sort of raise questions about whether that is the right course of action or the wrong course of action. But I'll say that it's his choice to make. And I don't get this mainstream media freak out about it just because he's not going to play in their sandbox with them.
Well, Andrew, I kind of get the mainstream media freak out because they're looking for anything they can get on Pierre Poilievre, right? We know exactly that anything that could be, even the idea that a headline could be made about it, that a negative headline can be made about it, well, they're going to write it, right? Any opportunity they get to try and slander Pierre Poilievre, to try and paint the Conservative leader as a negative, populist, far-right figure, they're going to do it. And remember, at these Parliamentary Press Gallery dinners, that was also where Justin Trudeau made the joke about how he gets such favorable headlines from the media, how because he pays them, over $600 million, that number has gone up by now, I'm pretty sure, but because he pays them that much money, of course he gets favorable media coverage. No wonder it's turned out so favorable for Justin Trudeau. No wonder we're seeing the coverage we're getting from the commission hearings after Justin Trudeau basically paid the media off to write favorable headlines for him. That's what he said at this dinner a few years back. And again, I don't blame Pierre Poilievre for not attending this dinner. I think actually, shaking things up with the media in Ottawa is a good thing. They need to kind of realize that Conservatives are not just going to pick up the baton and continue this sort of cash, give money to the media for favorable headlines. That needs to stop. But I will say, I think that Pierre Poilievre can do better with reaching out to media, specifically independent media. Look, if you're not going to engage with the CBC, Global News, Globe and Mail, I understand that. Clearly, when he tried to, David Akin heckled him and acted like a child. So if you're not going to do that, I do think the opposition leader should be speaking to Canadians as much as possible and doing that through the media as much as possible. It doesn't have to be exclusively through the media. He has a larger social media platform than a lot of these other journalists. But I would like to see him engage with independent media more often. I think that would be a real shakeup to the media in Ottawa. That would really signal to the legacy media that things are changing. And a government under Pierre Poilievre is not just going to continue this sort of love affair with the legacy media. That would, I think, that would be a good thing. But again, like I said, this is a nothing story. The media will always try and take it because it's an opportunity to bash Conservatives.
Yeah, I will say, just in closing on this, I think that he probably should put himself in front of media more. And I think the David Akin situation is great. I think he won that week because I think he really exposed the media and their approach to him. And I think he held his own. And the point that I've made on my show and to people that are working in the orbit of Pierre Poilievre of the past is that if you trust your candidate to be able to answer and handle it, I'd put him out there and then get the clip from it, show Canadians what's happening. Because when you don't engage, that becomes the story. Whereas when you engage, they show their hand and you slap back. I think that becomes a much better story. But I'm sure we'll have lots of opportunities for that in the months and years to come. Harrison Faulkner, you can catch him at the show Ratioed every week. You can catch me at the Andrew Lawton Show, and both of us you can catch sifting through the day-to-day testimony for the next 5-6 weeks from the Public Order Emergency Commission. This is True North. If you're watching on YouTube, please do subscribe. We have a goal this month of getting to 100,000 subscribers and also raising $100,000. So you can support both of those campaigns by subscribing on YouTube and heading to donate.tnc.news. And you can do that whether you're watching on Facebook too. So thanks very much. Have a great weekend, everyone. We'll talk to you next week.